Ladies and gentlemen, good day. It is once more a pleasure to come and engage in conversation with you in this manner. We bring you this afternoon a Dispatch Afesis-Corplan dialogue, which is one of the standing features of our media partner, the Daily Dispatch. In the Eastern Cape, the Dispatch dialogues have come to be a known feature in our public conversations, but also in our annual calendars. This one focuses on local government in particular and reflects in the 20-year journey of local government. The Daily Dispatch needs no introduction, right? It is a strong media presence in the province, has been around for quite some time and plays quite a significant role in the facilitation of public conversations of the nature that we're having today. And Afesis-Corplan is a local NGO based in East London, whose work is on urban development and local governance in particular, and the organization works across the country. This afternoon is not necessarily about the Daily Dispatch and Afesis-Corplan in particular, and so I don't want to spend a lot of time on these two organizations, least to say that we are excited to bring this dialogue and the conversation that we're having. We have invited a panel of really influential people in local governance, people who shape conversations in local government in particular, and whose work contributes to strengthening local government or even in the policy conversations and thinking around local governance. In our panel is the Auditor General of South Africa, Ms. Tsakani Maluleke, who takes over from the late Kimi Makwetu and has produced quite interesting and riveting reports since her reign, and we look forward to hear from her. Also joining her on the panel is Mr. Xolile George, who is the Chief Executive at the South African Local Government Association, known as SALGA, and he also will be joining us in our reflection. And of course, Mr. George works specifically in local government with municipalities, and so we really look forward to engaging conversations with him. And the third panelist is Mr. Ebrahim Fakir, whom most of you have seen in media as a political analyst, whose insights and opinion are drawn on by many members in media and in research. Mr. Fakir is a director of programs for the Orwell Socioeconomic Research Institute, and he writes and researches on public administration, political economy, and politics in general. And we also look forward to engage with him. And so our panelists are really going to appear in that order. And without wasting much time, let us now turn it and invite the AG to address us. Thank you. Over to you, AG.
Thank you very much, Sis Nontando, and thank you for that very kind introduction. It is indeed a pleasure to form part of this important dialogue this afternoon, and a warm greeting to my fellow panelists and speakers, Mr. Xolile George, and as well as Mr. Ebrahim Fakir. I am particularly honored to share this particular platform with you. Members of the Daily Dispatch team, thank you for facilitating this important and timely conversation. I want to greet everybody that's on this platform listening to us today. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Challenges facing local government have been documented over many years, and they can be traced back to the dawn of South Africa's democracy, as outlined in the 1998 White Paper on Local Government, which states, and I'm going to just quote from it, it states that service backlogs, collapsed or deteriorating infrastructure, as well as deteriorating credit worthiness and borrowing capacity, have put pressure on municipal cash flows and financial management. So there was a recognition of the challenges of local government even back then. The white paper was then crafted as a mini constitution to enable local government, which really was set up as its own sphere of government in our constitution. But the white paper was there to enable local government to deliver services directly to the people and ultimately deliver a better life for South Africans. And then the AGSA, as we well know, derives its own mandate from the Constitution, as well as the Public Audit Act, which is our enabling legislation, which legislation, as you know, was recently amended to ensure that the office can contribute to the journey of implementing consequence management when things have gone wrong. And I'll talk a little bit more about that a bit later on. Now, over the last 20 years, we've seen significant progress in the financial accounting and frameworks and practices that apply to municipalities. And this has directly influenced our own game as the auditors in terms of how we approach our audit work for local government. If I just look at what has happened in terms of the frameworks for financial and performance management, you've got to recognize that local government transitioned from what was essentially called statements for generally accepted municipal accounting practice to a new set of accounting standards called GRAP, right, the generally recognized accounting practices. And GRAP was aligned to IFRS, the International Financial Reporting Standards. IFRS is essentially much more complex. It provides more timely, relevant, useful information to users of financial information, but it puts onerous pressure on the people preparing financials as well as those that audit financials. But those preparing financials have to apply much greater complexity in terms of how they look at different account balances. They're required to apply judgment in terms of specific areas of those accounts, and they're required to demonstrate that their management practices actually correlate with what they're putting on paper as their financial reports. So what I'm saying is, because of the decision to transition towards GRAP, there was then a much greater complexity introduced into the course of preparing financial information and even auditing financial information. Over and above GRAP, municipalities also had MSCOA introduced into their lives, effective from the 1st of July 2017. And MSCOA is the Municipal Standard Chart of Accounts, which provides a uniform and standardized financial transaction classification framework. These are all important evolutions, but they do introduce particular levels of complexity. And as I say, it increases complexity. It then requires much deeper skills from an accounting and financial management point of view, which skills are not always available to municipalities, especially those in the rural areas. Alongside the evolution on financial reporting, there were also changes in terms of how municipalities ought to plan for and report on their performance. So much greater levels of performance reporting requirements that municipalities have to contend with. And then we've had to also evolve as an audit office, audit the more complex financials, audit the performance information, and look at compliance requirements, which are set out through the framework owned by the National Treasury. All of which frameworks are important to improve accountability, transparency, efficiency, all of that. They're really important. However, they do put much greater pressure. I'm also taking note of the fact that despite the changes and the advancements in the frameworks, and whether it's for preparation or for auditing, as well as the different ways that players in the system have tried to support municipalities to true up their own capabilities to respond to these pressures, we've not seen the requisite improvements. Despite the many initiatives run by COCTA, run by National Treasury, by the provincial COCTAs, by the provincial treasuries, by SALGA, and many other players, we've just not seen the improvements that we wanted to see. And as a result, the Audit Office, the National Audit Office, still reports on pretty much the same things over time. We still talk about transversal challenges on a lack of credible financial controls, non-responsive leadership. We still talk about the difficulty of filling vacant key positions with competent and skilled staff. and we still report on the lack of proper consequence management. Our belief as an audit office is that we can address those challenges decisively and sustainably if we deal with 4 things: ethical leadership, capable administration, effective preventative control or checks and balances, and the last one is consequence management. And those are the 4 areas that we believe if we invest all of our time and capabilities and effort into, we'll be able to make the requisite change. On ethical leadership, we recognize that leaders set the tone. They are responsible for setting up an administration that has got competent people that will indeed act ethically, that will set up the controls that are required, and that will ultimately be held accountable. And we've also seen that the ability of the political leadership and the administration leadership to work effectively, respecting each other's space and ensuring that they support each other in executing on their distinct and complementary roles in leading a municipality. That is what's going to get a municipality to come right. And we see this over many years. Where there's stability at the political level, then things go well. Where there's instability, things don't go well. Where there is stability and competence in the administration, things go well, and the reverse is true. We've looked at clean audit outcomes, which essentially tell you whether or not financial and performance management is being done in a manner consistent with expectations. Where things run well, as I say, that's where you've got a stable, capable leadership team in the administration, particularly led by the municipal manager and CFO that have been in their jobs for 5 years. And where you've got instability in administration, there you have the disclaimer audit opinions and the adverse audit opinions, because that's where the worst audit opinions are. So we believe that stability and capability are really needing attention, and they've got to be seen in the same vein. If I come to capable administration, which is the second part of my point, is that what we've seen is that the MFMA defines the responsibilities and duties of a municipal manager, that's the accounting officer, pretty clearly. They set up responsibilities around accountability, transparency, performance. They even set out the responsibility to promote efficient, economic, and effective use of resources. When resources are not being spent in a way that's economic, that's efficient, that's responsible, that's where you end up with financial health problems. And that's why over many years, we keep responding to the notion that you've got a problem around financial health. And that's where you've got disclaimer audit opinions where there is a failure to deal with the issues around financial health and also with the issues around capability in the administration. And that's when you end up relying on consultants to do the work that a municipality ought to be doing. I just want to use the last 2 minutes of my time to deal with the last 2 issues. Effective preventative control. Without stable, capable leadership that instills discipline, that monitors that preventative controls are not just designed appropriately, but are implemented consistently, then you're not going to win the order of the day. And what we've seen is that the failure of municipalities to set up preventative controls is what's making it difficult for them to deliver more with what are limited funds. And that's one of the issues that confronts us today. Diminishing resources, but then have to stretch even further to meet the growing and competing needs of citizens. And lastly, effective and timely consequence management. We've said this many times over. Without tone at the top by the political leadership, a capable administration that's held accountable, you're not going to get institutions that deliver in a way that's predictable and that's consistent with what's expected. So I will talk later about our MI processes, but we are implementing those and we are doing quite well in terms of identifying MIs and notifying them to the municipal managers, and they are responding well in the main. And where they don't, we then step up and enforce our paths. We can do this all the time, but the only way we're going to win the game of ensuring that we have a capable local government sphere that citizens can rely upon and trust, that we will only get if we put the right kind of leadership in place. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'll hand back to you, Nontando.
Thank you so much, AG. Oh my goodness, really, really just Powerful insights, absolutely. And I can't wait to hear how Mr. George reflects on this. So Mr. George, without even wasting time, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Program Director Nontando, and good afternoon to my fellow panelists. It's always a great pleasure to interact with both of you, Tsakani and Ibra. And over many years, we have interacted quite a lot on this very same topic. But it doesn't require us to spend a lot of time on elaborating on many of the known things that local government is always faced with. Perhaps what is more important for us, using the experience and the empirical evidence that has been gathered over the last 20 years of democratic local government, to really look at some of the most effective responses to what I would call structural and systemic challenges facing local government. And I think AG has correctly outlined some of those. One of the key issues that we have learned as SALG over this period of the last 20 years, at least local government system in its current form, there has been a lot of improvements that we have seen, at least at the level of social services in terms of provision of those. But what has become much more evident to all of us is that the transformation of local government is an enormous medium and long-term undertaking. It's not a short-term undertaking. That has become very clear given the number of interventions that we have done. Some of them we have been very impatient, correctly so, but it's quite clear to us that it is an enormous task before us. The second part is that as we seek to improve municipal performance, we are also realizing that it's a long-term and dynamic process at the same time, given the complexity of the space, complexity of the environment, and the multi-level governance system that we have as a country. So the third area is around the acknowledgement, as I've said, of the significant progress that we have seen around municipalities. But yet, with all of these significant improvements we have seen, there still appears a wide range of programs that have been directed at supporting local government. There's been large amounts of transfers aimed at supporting local government, including a number of technical aspects that we all know have been directed at local government. So far, we have no less than 11 interventions in local government aimed at capacity building. But what we are beginning to recognize now is that we need to go far more beyond the word capacity building, because it moves from a platform where the conducive environment exists, but we are looking at improving the performance of functionaries in the institution. But once we adopt a much more expansive approach, similar to the National Development Plan, where we look at capabilities of the institutions, so that when we drive capacity, we are also alive to the fact that the supportive environment in a municipality is as much important as the area of support. What we do think that needs to be done as we prosecute this conversation is that if you look at some of the intervention support that have been aimed at local government, for the last 20 years, we have spent no less than 9.3 billion rand, be it province, be it national, aimed at capacity building. Yet the results do not show up, precisely because some of these interventions have been repeat interventions that are spectacularly failing, because they have not been thought out through properly to respond to what we characterize as systemic weaknesses in the environment, and some of them are structural in nature. For instance, look at the demarcation process. We have used this instrument more to deal with the apartheid spatial geography that has been there, but largely to deal with configurations of geographies more for functional governance, more than anything else. But the spatial logic that defines them still remains largely there. So instead, what we have done, we have seen this for the number of municipalities that have been amalgamated since year 2000, more than 47 municipalities are still in the doldrums. They can't raise revenue. Instead, what has happened is that we have used a demarcation instrument that took sometime a municipality that is well off relatively from a functionality, amalgamating with another municipality, and today all of those municipalities are in a trap. They can't exist as viable instruments. So the 163 municipalities that AG has flagged as being on the risk of financial viability, those are real challenges that we face that are more occasioned by the structural limitation of municipalities that we face. The other part is about dealing with what we know, the weaknesses in the municipalities around technical capacity, as well as weaknesses around poor level of leadership, political leadership that exist in many of our municipalities that cannot pass the test that the white paper on local government has put up, where we need leaders that are able to drive transformation in municipalities, to bridge a coalition of interest in municipalities in such a way that they can build social compacts to be able to work out solutions that work out in municipalities. Instead, what we've seen over this period is a digression since 1994 of us living up to the values and attributes that the white paper on local government has done. For instance, the objects of local government in section 152 of the Constitution, very few municipalities could easily tick up the box and say, just on those 5 objects only, we have been able to say we are able to provide a democratic and accountable government. We're able to provide basic services in a sustainable manner. 75% of our communities now are able to say, yes, we do receive your services, but they are unreliable. On the one hand, the structural limitations around inability to raise revenue, we're sitting with 230 billion rand now of the weight of debt that is visited on municipalities due to non-payment of services. On the one hand, they have a corresponding obligation to pay their bulk creditors, Eskom, water boards, to the tune of 113 billion rand. So the settling weight of the overall debt also weakens the ability of municipalities to exist as going concern. As AG has said, more than 57% of our municipalities are just unable to collect even the revenue that is due to them. So how do we deal with those issues? The right leadership is required at municipalities. Political parties must play that role to make sure that we don't have a situation like we had in 2016, where almost 2/3 of leaders that were assigned to local government across various politics are all new. And new as they are, many of them, they don't have the requisite capacity that can pass the test that is outlined in the white paper. So there is a structural limitation. There is also a leadership a capacity that is a product of democratic process that very few of us sitting around the table have a control of. But we think that political parties must be able to learn from that and make sure that as we send leaders next time, we appreciate the role played by our cities and municipalities. For instance, if you look at our cities, just 27 municipalities, not percent, 27 of them out of 257, they carry 85% of the GDP of the country. 27 municipalities in the country. So if you have to send leaders on that, you must be alive to the fact that you are sending leaders to carry out the economic aspirations of the country, the economic development trajectory of the country. And second, when you look at those are the sites of collection of taxes for our country. So when you don't have the right leaders on those, you are invariably contributing to a cancerous effect of declining fortunes of our country in terms of economies. So we think that political leaders need to be alive to those realities to make sure that as we go forward, we are able to get the right kind of leadership that would pass the ethical test and make sure that when we have responsibilities to provide support, we don't only focus on capacity, but we deal comprehensively with the capability statement of the municipality as an institution. As a SALGA, we are quite pleased that some of the instruments we need for performing oversights, like public accounts committees have now been legislated, something that has not been there before. And we're quite pleased that as we go forward, we will be able to separate those responsibilities and make sure that the requisite tools to empower them to report directly to council, something that was not there before, is going to be one of those areas that we look forward to play our role in strengthening that arm to perform oversight, but also law enforcement agencies to do aggressively what they have started to do in municipalities to arrest criminals that are masquerading as leaders who are hell-bent on looting resources at municipalities. Because as we see the looting in our country now, the public violence, we need to make sure that local leaders are able to understand the gravity of the inequality, the spate of unemployment that is afflicting many communities, to make sure that we can use local economic development to build a staircase for the poor, to connect in citizens, to make sure that in the municipalities, the public procurement system is used as a transformative tool to absorb a number of unskilled people that otherwise would not be able to even contribute to the coffers of municipalities. So we need a visionary leadership that can draw an across-the-board coalition of forces to make sure that we can build social compacts that will understand the task at hand and give to reality the aspirations of the National Development Plan.
Thank you very much, Mr. George. Very interesting indeed. And we do want to encourage members of the public at this point in time or at any point in the conversation, feel free to post to us your questions to the panel, and we'll pose them directly to the panel. Ebrahim, leadership, a capacity crisis. What are your thoughts on this?
Thanks, Nontando, and good afternoon to everyone, especially Ms. Maluleke, the AG, and Mr. George, and of course to all the participants who are listening. Vital questions, but I'm going to take a slightly different departure point, Nontando, and in the process of answering this question that you've posed, try and integrate everything that I'm saying. So my departure point is going to be that both the Auditor General and Mr. George from SALGA are talking about the kind of systemic administrative approach, right? So we can largely call it governance. And I want to suggest that, governance is actually a post-political fact. It cannot exist a priori. It doesn't exist before an acquisition of power and influence in society. So before there's these processes of government and processes of governance, there has to be a capture of political power. Now, if power and if your processes of politics are bad or rotten or poor, then axiomatically it would follow that your government processes and your governance processes are going to be poor. Now, there are instances around the world, obviously, where societies can withstand bad politics for a period. For certain periods of time, all societies are going to go through forms of rupture and types of problems, and they'll have bad politics. I mean, the US had Trump, for crying out loud. Britain has Mr. Johnson, who can't appear to comb his hair properly. So, and the kind of politics those countries have had in the recent period were quite recidivist and debilitating. Yet, because they had strong institutions and had strong systems, they were able to withstand the bad politics or the assault of bad politics on the society. Our systems, our processes, our institutions are far too fragile. And worse, our politicians in political leadership, nationally and locally, have manipulated processes, manipulated institutions, despite their fragility, to render them completely hollow. So they can't actually do some of the good things that Mr. George and the AG are talking about, systemic interventions around capability and stability. So I want to pick up from what Tsakani was talking about when she spoke about stability and capability, right? So if we think about capability, there are 5 different dimensions. The first is the regulatory dimension. That is the ability to make laws, make policy and implement those policies and make rules that you must follow, to make decisions, to distribute resources and so on. So that's the regulatory capacity. Now, overall, our regulatory capacity in South Africa is actually pretty good. We perform extremely well in all kinds of indices when it comes to accounting and other regulatory standards and so on. Where do we fall down then in the regulatory capacity? It's on the systemic issues of oversight and accountability. And these are the latter 2 things that the AG is talking about, right? So the ethical leadership is the top kind of thing. At the bottom is the systemic processes of oversight and accountability. And if you don't have sufficient oversight and accountability in the operations of municipal councils, and this goes from municipal to provincial to national government, if oversight and accountability breaks down, everything else will literally follow and break down. So you have capability, which is first indicator is the regulatory ability of the state. Some of it is pretty good. When we come to the technical ability, that's the second indicator of capability. The second indicator is its technical ability. And Mr. George is talking about how, we've got weaknesses in capacity. I would argue that sometimes I don't think it's capacity. Of course, there are aspects of capacity in high-level reticulation, engineering, infrastructure development, networking, and so on, right? You may have those capability problems. But I want to argue that there's also just a complete lackadaisical attitude and laxity towards the responsibilities that people have in council, whether they are elected politicians or whether they are appointed officials in the bureaucracy and the technocracy. I mean, it's not hard to find someone who will tell you that the records of a municipality are completely in a shambles. Sometimes we don't even know what the extent of unemployment and indigence in our communities are, even though you're elected public representative. Or you don't know where the no-fee paying schools are and what their infrastructure requirements are in order to eradicate either pit latrines, bucket toilets, and so on, or what kind of water and reticulation they need, or kind of what extent of teachers they need. So you have a breakdown systemically, not just of accountability and oversight, but also of responsiveness of the elected representatives, but also of the officials who are meant to do their work. Which person has not interacted with a municipality and never been able to get a resolution to a problem within 3 or 4 months? I've known of instances where someone needs to reverse a simple credit and a debit at a big metropolitan municipality. And 6 months after writing letter upon letter, nothing has been resolved. So on that second aspect of technical ability, there's a significant weakness. On the third, which is the administrative ability. Here you think about predation and predatory interests, both of politicians and of officials in council, who have rendered the institutions completely hollow. And because of these administrative manipulated processes and procedures in the state, locally and nationally, you've had this massive hollowing out. And that has a major impact on the fourth area, which is coercion, the ability to extract revenue and resource the operations of government. And then, of course, once you raise the resources, you can spend it on the kind of development things. I know I don't have much time left, but I want to just leave with two things. I think South Africa is going through a process of both transformation and transition fatigue. Think about interventions at local government level. We started off at some stage with Project Consolidate, and we're now through at the district development model. And if you think about the district development model, all of the high levels of state capacity, administrative, regulatory, technical, coercive functions need to be present. Otherwise, the district development model goes the same way as things like Project Consolidate. So coming up with new systems is not going to help. And finally, in conclusion, I would argue that it's, at least in local government, we have to get back to a basics approach. Mr. George is absolutely correct about the nature of leadership which has been sent to local government levels. For all of the things that our political parties say about how importantly they take local government, they send their weakest cadres to local government, and that's a major problem. So we as a society also have to stop looking at national and provincial and national government as the places of government and governance, when in reality it should be local government. And we have to then as society incentivize political parties to send their best people to local government, not their worst.
Thank you, Mr. Fakir. And I mean, there is quite a great interest, judging by the questions that are being posed on the chat. And I really do not want to eat time away from you responding directly to the members of the public who are posting the questions that are coming through. But AG, I really would like you to talk to us just a little bit about the expanded powers of the AG and what that means in the context and the times that we're finding ourselves now in local government. And I mean, we're not yet seeing fruit from the expanded powers, and I'd like you to talk about that just a little bit. And both to you, Ebrahim and Xolile, as you respond to the other questions that are posted on the chat. I would like to pose a very direct question that I'd like you to respond to. So who has the power to turn the tide, in your view? If we are all recognizing that local government seems to be on a digressing trajectory, who at this point in time has the power to intervene, to change the trajectory, and to imbue or to interject within local government the energy that's required for the kinds of leadership that we're talking about to emerge? I'll turn it back to you. We are going to try very hard with my back office team to process the questions as they come through on the chat, and I'll pose those to you. Over to you, AG.
Okay, thanks for that question. So the Act was amended in response to the legislators as well as the public becoming quite impatient with the AG's repeated message about a lack of consequences, about a culture of tolerating transgressions, about irregular expenditure that kept growing year on year and remained unattended. And just to specify what irregular expenditure is, in the course of our audit, we will find something that is resulting in non-compliance, in that when in the course of procuring goods and services, the law was not complied with. And it can be as a result of many things. The Public Finance Management Act and the same provisions in the Municipal Finance Management Act place on the accounting officer, the MM, the duty to take the audit report from the AG and then go and investigate the facts around this irregular expenditure and to say what caused this non-compliance and how do we deal with it. Part of it would be to say, well, if there is loss, let's go and recover it. If the contract that we entered into is such that we're overpaying, let's cancel it and that it was entered into inappropriately. If it is a member of our staff that needs training, let's attend to it. If it's a member of our staff that needs discipline, let's deal with it. And if it's a matter of criminality, let's report it to the law enforcement agencies. And that's the style, right? So that's the responsibility of the accounting officer. The problem we found is that year on year, none of those actions were being taken. So the AG would audit and report, and then the accounting officer would not act as provided for in law. So Parliament then said, you know what, AG, we want you to go and follow up on whether or not that accounting officer does do what's necessary. If they do it, that's fine. You leave it, you allow them the space to do it because they are still the central point of accountability. It is them that are appointed as the stewards over public funds. So it is to them that we must look to taking the requisite corrective action. If they fail to do it, we actually expect the council to hold them accountable. We want you as AG to step in where there is failure in the system. So I'm highlighting this to say that our powers are there as a complementary mechanism. We are there to inform the accounting officer of things that they need to attend to quickly. So we'll say, look, we found this non-compliance. This one is about a contract issued to a supplier that doesn't have a valid tax certificate. You need to deal with this because you don't want a culture where we tolerate people not conforming with the law. So please deal with it going forward. But this one relates to a contract where we can see this financial loss. Deal with it urgently. And we want you to tell us within 20 working days how you're dealing with it. And if they come back with a response that's satisfactory for us, in that we believe their action is going to be adequate and appropriate to deal with the problem, then we give them the opportunity to act. Because we've got to be fair with accounting officers, right? We alert them to the issue and we must give them a chance to act. And then we go back and check if they have acted. And if they have, then it's fine. We continue to monitor. But if they haven't, then our powers kick in. What are our powers? We can refer the matter to investigation because when you audit, you can only flag a non-compliance. You can't figure out who are the beneficiaries. You can't figure out what the intention is. You can't figure out even if there's criminality. Someone has to investigate the detail of that transaction and figure out what happened. So we would refer the matter for investigation ourselves if the accounting officer fails. And then once the investigation comes back, we then give them another chance to say, right, we've had the investigation done. Now we want you to act. You must go and cancel that contract. And then we give them a fair chance to do it. If they still fail to do it, then we issue binding remedial action, which is a much firmer stance, right? Which says, now you will do this. And if you fail to do this, the following shall apply. And the following would include issuing a certificate of debt in the name of that accounting officer. And it's in the name of the accounting officer, not the person who benefited from the contract, but on the name of the accounting officer, because that is the steward, the appointed steward of public funds. So you asked me the question, why are people not seeing the fruit of these powers? 2 or 3 reasons. The first one, I know, thank you. The first one is that the law has been active now for 2 years, and so we've now started to implement it at more auditees. Initially, we started at 9, now we're doing it at 57 municipalities. So it'll take time, because at every chance, we have to give the accounting officer the opportunity. Where they don't act appropriately, then we do take action. In the vast majority of instances, we're finding elements do respond. I'll give you an example. In Mogalakwena, we said to the municipal manager there, we have found that you paid 13 million rand inappropriately for the contract related to Moshate Stadium and the construction there. So the fiscus is losing money, deal with it. So they acted, they investigated, they disciplined their staff, and they've now got a legal process to go and collect the money that was inappropriately paid. So what we'll do, we'll continue to track. And that's the sort of responsiveness that we believe our powers are driving in the environment. The second thing is that where people don't act, then we do implement. So the reason is, 1, there's responsiveness. 2, it does take time, because we must give them a fair opportunity before we hit their pocket. And 3, fortunately, there are people that are indeed acting in the way that we expect. So I hope that gives you a good sense of how we're dealing with our powers. The one thing I'll always end off with, even if the AG had to chase after each and every one of these irregularities, it'll never be at the pace, and it'll never have the impact that we need, because at the end of the day, you still need capable management in those institutions. So you've got to still look to the municipal manager and to the council to ensure that they are leading this environment by building controls, by driving accountability, by driving effective oversight, so that when you find a problem, you fix the full system, not just one little problem. You don't chase one transaction. You actually go back and say, is there a training problem? Let's deal with it. Is there a system problem? Let's deal with it. So that going forward, you stem the losses. So for us, the key issue is still about, is there a leadership team in that municipality that is seized with driving strength on the ground, building a strong and responsive institution? So thank you.
Thank you so much. And Xolile, just before you come through, there are 2 questions on the chart that I also would like you to respond to as they come in. And one is from Jongi Kaya. And Jongi Kaya wants to know that councillors don't seem to have the capacity generally to translate policies into action. And by your own submission, your training interventions over the years haven't really delivered the impact, the capacity building impact that you were expecting of them. He asks, what then in the new coming administration and going forward? And Xolile asks, the law is currently being changed to fix the period of employment of senior managers. And he says, the AG has now stated that municipalities that have stable leadership perform better in oversight and finance management. Is this change in policy not working against the notion of stability? And as you come, I also would like you to just touch on those questions that are being raised. And we do encourage the members of the public to post your questions as we continue the conversation. Over to you, Xolile.
No, thank you very much, Program Director, on those 3 questions. I think there are sub-elements of your main question, what needs to be done? If all these interventions have been experimented with a limited impact, what is it that needs to be done? I guess the points lie in our respective inputs as panelists, what AG has outlined on leadership, as well as what Ebrahim has covered on the need for a political system that is fairly robust, as well as participation of the citizenry in electing political functionaries that reflect broadly their aspirations, but also carry the necessary capabilities and capacity that the people expect them to do. And this holds true for local government, because we are also a microcosm of the broader society. This is the only sphere, program director, that where we have a dual system of democratic participation by citizens. Where it comes to representation, we have got a constituency-based system. 50% of the structure of a municipal representation is a democratic outcome that is ward-based. So as we think at a country level about the recent judgment of the Constitutional Court last year that says there must be room for independence, we must review our electoral laws to allow for direct participation and direct representation. Local government has had a fair share of that, including the proportional representation system. So we are asking for political parties to make sure that in this cycle of the fifth administration of local government, they spend a bit of time, and we've given them the criteria that we think will be important as SALGA. I'll just give you one example of the criteria. When you look at the nomination of councillors, the public representative, to make it on the list, you are likely through that list to select your top 11 people, the 10 being the mayoral committee with the mayor, the 11th being the speaker. We have now legislated the role of the chief whip. So I'll call it the top 12 that must lead the day-to-day functioning of the municipality. We think it's very important that if you look at these roles, they are all legislated, all of them. We know the role of a mayor and the requisite responsibilities attached to that portfolio. We also know the role of the speaker and the portfolio committee holders, MMC for finance, infrastructure, and so on. They really require a lot of engagement, not only with the community, but to be able to provide direct leadership in their own portfolio. So it means there has to be a fair balance of the kind of skills, political skills, a bit of understanding of policy, as well as skills that are largely falling into the domain of what you would call academic qualifications. We shouldn't shy away from that. If you look at 2016, 67% of our councillors have matric or less. Now you are unable to interfere with that because it's deemed as a direct democratic outcomes of nomination. But knowing our political system that is highly factionalized in the country, you are likely to have people coming from this kind of faction and that kind of faction, not necessarily the best amongst that political part that must be there. And that gets visited into municipalities. So we have given them a clear criteria that we think must create a fair balance around them. So that's the first level of input. We are able to play our role in terms of providing support, as well as training on oversight and so on. But where we seem to be failing at this point in time, and it would remain failure regardless until we deal with it, the system is able to enforce self-correcting mechanism within itself. What system am I referring to? The intergovernmental system we have in our country, national, provincial, and local. We have oversight instruments that province and national have in municipalities. So if local government is evidently failing to perform what it is required to do, to hold officials accountable, for example, we are sitting with AG report that says the following 21 municipalities have actually regressed for the last 5 years of this term. Of these ones, many of them have had disclaimers for the last 5 periods. You visit all of those municipalities, you ask a simple question: has this MM been in this role for the same period? Has the CFO been in this role? The very same CFO who cannot produce final statements. And that person is still left in office. So we should be able then to say, when there is evident failure of a local system, how do we mobilize the accountability instruments at the disposal of province and national? And those instruments are not supposed to be thought of, they're existing. You go to the Division of Revenue Act, Section 18 and Section 19 of the Division of Revenue, imposes certain obligations on the accounting officers of transferring departments, whether you're a DG in a province or HOD. You have the same in the PFMA, Public Funds Management Act. You have corresponding obligation in Section 38J of that that says, before you transfer money to any other entity, satisfy yourselves that there's requisite financial management capabilities. They are able to account appropriately. It says the same for the Division of Revenue grants. that you must satisfy yourself and you must be able to withhold in terms of Section 226 of the Constitution. But we have seen no municipalities where there's been a direct attempt to hold transfer, where we know AG is going to walk in, audit this. At the end of the year, 6 billion was in a number of municipalities. At the end of the financial year, less than R1 billion is there. There's nothing in the transaction that links what has happened. But come July 1, as it has happened in the last 2 weeks, I can assure you, funds have been transferred by National Treasury, funds have been transferred possibly by COCTA into those departments that are perennial, offenders in terms of the fiscal governance of our country. How do you reconcile those two issues? Where you know, as a result, here is Ngagamodiri, or here is OR Tambo municipality, here is Amatole. For the last 5 years, this is their financial management appalling record. But we feed the beast. We transfer the funds. So we are directly contravening legislation that is there, that is supposed to make sure that we are fairly robust to hold each other accountable. And it doesn't mean that we should be thinking about the people who will not receive services. People will receive services. The equation of local government enjoins council, administration, and communities. So by so doing, in my view, we will be protecting the very citizens, because you are going to ask them, I'm going to transfer this money, but show cause why I should transfer if you are still having officials who can't do this. So the system is fairly inbuilt with mechanisms where we can robustly hold each other to account to make sure that we arrest the malfeasance and malice that is happening. We have seen that happening in Nelson Mandela Metro. Treasury withheld money, but it was only one institution for a limited period, when in fact we think that there's many candidates in the country. And as SALGA, we have taken action to ask municipalities, show cause why we should motivate for you to receive more grants. And guess what? We receive very few responses in some of municipalities. We have said the same to Treasury and National COCTA. Please make sure that the tools at your disposal are implemented. So the system can be forced to self-correct, but we seem to be shy to execute that which the law expects us to do. The last component of my input is around the need for stability. We have seen municipalities where AG has given us a very good report on the clean audit municipalities. In some of them, you find that an MM, CFO, and other senior managers have fairly been in office for quite some time, including mayors who have been in office up to now. Contrary to other municipalities where you would have seen, for instance, in the Eastern Cape, out of 39 municipalities, 17 of them have seen disruption in the political troika, the chief whip, the mayor, and the speaker. In all of them, they have had 17 changes for the last 4 years. How do you find a semblance of stability in areas where the political ruptures that happen in municipalities get visited into the administration? So those issues, in my view, are within that. If we have officials that are allowed to remain in their roles, provided they perform, you have a fairly robust system, you are likely to see the kind of stability that we are seeing in the Western Cape, in some of our municipalities in Gauteng, in some of the municipalities in the Eastern Cape. Senqu is one of those municipalities that for the last 9 years have received clean audits. Their officials have been in office for more than 19 years, 15 years. But in certain instances where you have got good performing managers that can't survive 2 years because of the changes I've just outlined, 17 out of, you're likely to have those visited municipalities. So there are many areas where we can, for instance, the issue of appointing senior managers in municipalities. The triangle that defines a municipality is community, it's council, politically, as well as administration. So where we have instances where we are unable to get the right officials, one of the issues we're advancing as SALGA, should we not be rather considering a transversal recruitment system that would prevail across all municipalities? In other words, you don't have a Numa municipality in Butterworth that may not have the requisite capacity to be able to choose the right officials. You are able to create a pairing mechanism to bring citizens into the equations in a manner that they can put to bear their own expertise to help municipalities to choose the right officials, but also bring them as part of performance monitoring of the municipalities, whether it carries out its object in local government. Those tools are within the municipalities, and we have put forward clear policy proposals, but we do want legislatures to be able to come on board when we see the executive not doing what it's supposed to do in terms of the law. And we can correct the system using those instruments.
All right. We're going to come back to that proposal just now, Mr. George, and I want to bring in Ebrahim, and I do also, Ebrahim, as you reflect, I would like you to pick up also, would like to hear your comments on this notion of a failing oversight machinery, where even the oversight departments aren't playing their part, right? So if we're looking at the notion of leadership and the oversight architecture, just reflect on that. And secondly, I really would like to hear you reflect on the mixed electoral system and why its uniqueness is not delivering for us in local government that which we had hoped in the design that it would. Over to you.
Thanks. Okay, so I just want to return to a couple of things, and in the process answer many of these questions. But I want to just ask Mr. George if he would think for a moment the Makhanda municipality in Grahamstown or Costa, which needed a court to allow communities to take over some of the functions of the municipality and keep some of the revenue in reserve. Now, all of the interventions you're talking about, I mean, could that realistically work in a place like Makhanda, where you had to have gift of the givers go to try and deliver water, or to build infrastructure which the municipality had got money from National Treasury for, but could not be found? And then a community organization must go and fulfill and perform the functions of a municipality, which brings me to a point that I think we have to reflect. Perhaps this is a moot point, but it's something we should ask, because the Constitution has already settled this question. Have we perhaps not given an overburdened local government with a set of functions that in reality it cannot fulfill? We have extensive legislative powers and extensive executive powers imbued in all municipalities, whereas in many other parts of the world, municipalities don't have such extensive executive and legislative powers. They kind of, in the decentralization type of debate, they are much more administrative entities and functional entities which actually just simply deliver services. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm saying I think we've settled them with a set of unrealistic expectations which they cannot in reality fulfill, given the conditions of who we are as a society, what we've inherited from apartheid, the amalgamation of all Bantustan areas into the old South Africa, and then expect them to meld different kinds of administrative, bureaucratic, and political traditions in one. And Mr. George raises an important point. He says perhaps if we make some of these interventions, you could start to look at the way in which, or municipalities will start to look at the way in which the Western Cape municipalities start to look. Think about this. The Western Cape is probably one of the few provinces which never, at the point of 1994 and the point of our transition, had to incorporate, other than Gauteng. Western Cape is probably the only other province which did not have to incorporate any old Bantustan areas or any of the old bureaucratic traditions, modes of working, modes of behaving that we inherited from those areas. And I think that matters to a significant degree. But let me not focus too much on this. When I talk about this, going back to basics, right, Nontando, you're asking me about the oversight regime. If everyone simply did what they are supposed to do, then perhaps some of the problems that we are facing, we would not in fact be facing. Mcebisi Ndlechana has written an excellent book on PE, and well, his focus is on the ANC, but in PE. And Tsakani would perhaps find this interesting. There was a whole audit report which was produced about a community facility which was newly built post-94 and which was doing excellent outreach for children to go and the library, the multi-purpose center, accessing the internet. It was doing fantastically. They took a loan from the IDC to expand that facility. The money from the IDC disappeared. The AG had an extensive report on this whole thing. That report simply wasn't tabled at council. It is as brazen, the impunity is as brazen as that. Now, if you don't, despite the expanded powers after the Public Audit Amendment Act, despite the expanded powers that you've given the AG can only do so much. If the political leadership and administrative leadership fails to table a fundamental, required by law, to table the report to council, where else do we go? And I ask this question in frustration. So we can think of all these nice interventions, but if the system breaks down ethically somewhere, and any governance system is composed in this way, you can make rules, you can make bureaucratic interventions, you can make amendments to the law, you can devise new systems. But if any one small ethical part breaks down, the entire system does. And any governance system is like a circle, it's like a dam. You break one small part and you try to plug it in, another hole will open up somewhere. And at some point, the social and political culture in society has to kick in to be able to prevent those things happening, because the systems are not going to be able to plug every single hole that's available in it, or that comes about in the system. Now, I think there's deep corrosiveness in the society as a whole at the level of political leadership, and the dual electoral system at local government level doesn't work for two reasons. First is, as I've already mentioned, I don't think parties send their best people there, number one. Number two, the processes are manipulated, and because our system has both PR councillors and ward councillors, even though ward councillors should be more powerful than PR councillors, because it serves parties' interests to be able to control the people who they deploy. They give more power and make PR councillors way more influential than the ward councillors. So you in effect have a two-tier system operating at local government level. Who should be more powerful is the ward council, because that person interacts with communities, but they don't. And so the PR councillors become more important. The PR councillors are more easily manipulated when you make decisions, when you make budget decisions, when you award contracts, and very importantly, when major budgetary allocations are made, even though we know the politicians are not supposed to be involved in that, they are. And that explains why. And so the responsiveness element follows from that, because our understanding of responsiveness is that we must be responsive to our political principles, not to a community, firstly. Secondly, that the oversight system is largely about these polite visits here and there, rather than the actual hardcore scrutiny of projects, of staffing, of budgets, of annual plans, and of delivery against the annual plans. So oversight is actually hard bureaucratic work. It's not the soft visits to sites and speaking to a few officials. And we've warped that understanding. Lastly, is a policy issue. Is, I think, inherited from the Mbeki administration around driving towards surplus rather than running modest deficits. Is we've had then, because of that, austerity in all the wrong areas, and facilitating rent seeking on the other side in all the wrong areas. And so the austerity has kind of led to cuts in budgets around maintenance, around repairs, around extending and maintaining and keeping infrastructure going, which then has an impact on the delivery of actual services. And so that there's this unvirtuous cycle in which the processes of responsiveness and accountability and oversight break down. And that's why I think the dual PR ward system doesn't work as effectively as we would like it to.
All right, and so unfortunately, in the interest of time, we're going to have to leave it there. And I do want, as we part, half a minute each of you. I would like you to leave just reflective and thoughts, and a question for the public to ponder as we move towards the local government elections, but also as we find ourselves emerging through the chaotic week that we've had. What would your parting thoughts be? So I'm gonna start with you, AG, go through Xolile and Ebrahim, and we pull it to a close. So AG, over to you.
Thank you, Sis. We're facing these elections. We have yet another opportunity to influence the type of leaders that are going to take on the responsibility of leading these very important institutions. The Constitution, the MFMA, all of them, and other pieces of legislation, they make some interesting assumptions on the type of leadership that will take over the role of leading municipalities. The question that confronts us is how we make sure that this administration reflects on those aspirations and those expectations and those assumptions that are set out in the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well said. Xolile? You are muted, and such is the story of 2021.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I wish we had more time. And in the absence of that, maybe in the next round, we will go into detail in many of these interesting points that have been raised. A few points I want to deposit without discussing them. As we go forward, we need to think about how we would manage the phenomena of coalition governments, because 2016 bequeathed us with 27 of those. Yet at the time, we did not even have tools to manage coalition governments. We are likely to have more of those. We still do not have a tool to manage that. Two critical stages exist in managing coalition. The formative stage of a coalition, what happens when a council has been declared hung. We saw that in 2006 in Cape Town. It took more than a month to stitch out and cobble a coalition. It happened in 2016, dramatic moments and shifts. And we need to have that kind of a guideline, whether legislative, at a formative stage, as well as during the life cycle of the coalition, how to manage that. The second part is about what Ebrahim has raised. Yes, local government has been burdened with constitutional responsibilities more than its capacity financially to manage them. 46% of the function in the Constitution, in Schedule 3, Schedule 4, Schedule 5B, 46% of those have been assigned to local government, and there is no corresponding resources assigned to that. We need to rethink that. The third area is around separation of powers and functions in local government. Section 156 of the Constitution has to be amended to free council from obligations of being an instrument for churning out administration. So it has to focus on oversight, and we need to have that separation to allow them to perform much better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Ebrahim, your parting thoughts.
Thanks. You know, I look, as Ms. Maluleke is saying, we'll have another opportunity. We don't know whether the local government elections are going to happen this year or not. That's an outstanding question. My view, which I think is known, is I think it should be postponed for 6 to 8 months. Sounds irregular, but I don't think it is. And given the events of the last week, I think we must just please bear in mind that our institutions are actually precious. Without the institutions, we actually don't have much. And you can't, you know, there's certain objective principles of law and legality, what is right and what is wrong. And if you negotiate those now, you're not giving yourself a chance as a society in 20 years to have an objective standard of what is right and wrong. And if you negotiate those away now, what you're saying effectively is that those who are powerful, those who are popular, and those who can threaten insurrection should be able to negotiate themselves out of any kind of infractions that they commit. And I think this is a moment where society has to take a stand and say, no matter what, there is an objective standard of what is right and what is wrong, and certain things are wrong, and we will stay the course to ensure that they remain wrong, rather than negotiate them into becoming right.
Thank you very much. Such really food for thought. We are going to end it there this evening, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank members of our panel. It really has been an insightful and fruitful conversation, and we will create another opportunity to bring you back and to take her from where we've left it off, because you have began to just unpack and put on the table really, really interesting meat for conversation further. And so we're going to find opportunities between ourselves and our partner, the Daily Dispatch, to facilitate that space. And to the members of our public who have joined us in this conversation, both domestically and internationally, thank you so much for taking the time. And Thank you.